the foremost, she's one of the foremost historians in the United States right now, at least among the younger population, the younger generation of historians. And her talk will be about child migration to the United States from Central America and Mexico. That's October 15th at 4 p.m. at Prax, our new art center at OSU. Of course, it's already been promoted, but Javier Zamora, the author of the book, will be here at OSU October 16th at 7 p.m. I believe all the tickets are sold out, but if you buy the book, you can still go after the talk and get your book signed by him. You don't necessarily have to get a ticket. Or maybe there's always like 10 extra tickets that they actually don't sell that they have just for people who show up and special guests. If you want to chance it and show up, you may be able to get into the door. But I make no promises. Of course, I also want to thank the Corrales Benton Public Library, Theater and Reviews of Books Committee, as well as the person who suggested me, Dr. Susan Jackson Rogers from OSU.
We're not hearing you very well.
yeah,
We can't
I have trouble
understand you.
hearing.
I'm sorry, I'll speak up. Thank you. I'm used to yelling at students when I'm teaching without a microphone, so I'm scared of screaming into the microphone.
Screaming.
But I think this is the right volume, correct? Thank you. I'm going to start just by talking about some of the reviews that have already been published about this book.
Okay.
Since being published last year in 2023, Solito became a New York Times bestseller. Authors, newspapers, magazines, and journals from across the country and even the world and beyond praised it. The latest printing of Solito included some of the most worthy of those praises. Best-selling author Emma Straub praised its artistry. Solito, quote, I quote, is a stone-cold masterpiece, an absolute masterpiece. Other reviewers touch on the feelings the book would have on humans and invoke. The Los Angeles Review noted the Zamora's storytelling is crafted with stunning intimacy. You'll feel so close to the boy he was then that you'll think about him long after the book is done. And I can tell you, I read the book a few weeks ago, and I'm still thinking about the child that it centers on. And the book also won the annual book prize from the LA Times. Noted Latino author and public commenter Daniel Alacron agreed, writing that Solito will stay with you long after the last page. Maybe because I'm a historian, and I like to think about big picture things of why something happens, how our world came to be, about the social and cultural and political realities that people navigate. I particularly took note of the words by Pulitzer Prize winning Jose Antonio Vargas. He wrote, an instant classic, not only of the United States, but of America, but of all Americans. He met El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, the United States, and its people would see themselves and their realities. Often one would not want to see. They have created within Javier or Javiercito, the author and the character in the book. The line that stuck with me the most, made me think, and at times disturbed me, was by The Nation, a magazine that's been making America see its greatest faults and its potentials since the 1830s, when it was the Liberator, an abolitionist newspaper that campaigned against slavery. The Nation's review asserted that Solito is distinctly an American memoir and tells a distinctly American story. That is, it isn't just telling an immigration story. Solito is showing us the story of this country, of what it is, and perhaps what it can be. I'm gonna show the image of the book, and when I was reading the book, I really focused on the barbed wire on the boy's feet, and the boy is Javier Zamora, of the cacti and the bushes and the mountains and how it's dusk at night. If you haven't read the book, it focuses on the immigration story of Javier Zamora as a child, immigrating through Guatemala, through Mexico, then into the United States as an undocumented child, and doing so often by foot, at least when entering the United States through the desert Southwest. The front cover of Solito has an image of a child, Javier Zamora, imposed over a barbed wired fence, a landscape of brush and mountains after mountains, the moon, perhaps at dusk or right before sunrise, when he and his group of 6 or 5 or a dozen migrants, dependent on the time and place, would be attempting to reach the United States at night to escape, to not be seen. That is no accident. Javier endured that on his body or saw it on others. And I'm now going to dive into some history. This book really made me think of the US-Mexico border and its history and how we as US citizens, as Americans, play a role in that. As US authorities have increased enforcement near border crossings in urban, populated communities, they have pushed people into dangerous, remote areas. This isn't an accident. It's very much intentional. They use such terms as natural wall. Within the Southwest, unforgiving mountains and deserts, thousands of people seeking safety in the United States have succumbed to snake bites, animal attacks, heat strokes, dehydration, hyperthermia, all at least touch on somewhat within the book's pages. These mass deaths can be traced to border policies adopted in the early 1990s. The book takes place in the late 1990s. Ones that help us understand where we find ourselves today and understand Javier's experience. One of the architects of those policies was Silvestre Reyes, a Mexican-American from Texas like myself, and a politician that I, even if a bit hesitantly, voted for during congressional elections when living along the US-Mexico border. I lived in El Paso. Reyes was raised in the El Paso area farming community near New Mexico, the New Mexico state line, and as the grandchild of Mexican refugees who fled the violence of the Mexican Revolution from 1910 through 1920. Not unlike Javier, Javier's father is fleeing the aftermath of the Salvadorian Civil War. On his family farm, the child Reyes served as a lookout for Border Patrol agents and warned undocumented farm workers to hide or run, the farm workers that were working on his family ranch or farm. After being drafted into the Vietnam War, he took various civil service exams, and the Border Patrol was the first federal agency to call him, to offer him a job. He moved to Del Rio in the Southwest Texas to join the Border Patrol in 1969. Reyes rose through the ranks and became the Border Patrol's first Hispanic sector chief in 1984. When he was appointed to head the McAllen Border Patrol sector, which runs along the Lower Rio Grande Valley to the Gulf of Mexico. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Mexican agricultural workers often headed north for work to flee economic volatility in Mexico. The US immigration system foreclosed opportunities for legal migration, and many came without authorization. During these decades of apprehension, rates of Mexican migrants at the US-Mexico border increased as migration ebbed and flowed. From his station in Texas, Reyes told reporters that by the mid-1980s, he began noticing that a growing number of the people being apprehended originally came from Central America, not Mexico, where Central America is where Javier came from. He came from El Salvador. The Central American migrants included Guatemalans fleeing anti-indigenous genocide. Most of the migrants from Guatemala were Mayan or other indigenous groups, and the government in Guatemala at the time was massacring indigenous people. Salvadorians fleeing right-wing death squads, and Nicaraguans fleeing guerrillas known as Contras. During the Central American conflicts, the United States often backed oppressive right-wing regimes and offered official and unofficial support to other groups as part of the Cold War era objectives. Over 1 million displaced Central Americans fled violent government regimes, and guerrillas during the 1980s. The Reagan administration and following administration, both Democratic and Republican, pursued policies denying their asylum claims and deported thousands of people who never had the opportunity to seek legal counsel. Having come overland through Mexico, Central Americans were deported by costly flights. A destiny Javier escaped by passing as a Mexican. So something that we need to think about when we're reading the book, something we need to think about when we're considering Central American migrants, is that they're not just undocumented or unauthorized here in the United States. They have to do that over and over again, whether it's in Guatemala, whether it's in Mexico, where laws to protect immigrants are less enforced than here in the United States often. Reyes began planning what he saw as a cheaper strategy, one that would keep Central American refugees in Mexico, not unlike today's policies implemented by the last few administrations, again, both Republican and Democratic. Reyes began planning a blockade that would, as he stated, quote, back up these aliens on the Mexican side, start causing them problems over there. In 1993, Reyes became the El Paso Border Patrol Sector Chief. He implemented his plan through the Operation Blockade, renamed Operation Hold the Line to avoid connections with the Berlin blockade along the US-Mexico El Paso Ciudad Juarez border. He stationed at least 400 Border Patrol agents and their vehicles directly on the Rio Grande banks, going against official procedure, against orders that had partly centered on patrolling city streets. Reyes created a wall of agents and vehicles between El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, greatly curtailing the number of migrants crossing El Paso's urban core. But Reyes did not simply intend to stop unauthorized border crossings. He also wanted to improve Border Patrol's relations with El Paso's residents, who were, of course, mostly Mexican American. El Paso's Mexican American community had long complained about the Border Patrol's racial profiling and harassment, even though most Border Patrol agents themselves were Mexican American, which included such incidents as Border Patrol agents stopping a high school football coach and then putting a gun to his head when the coach was driving players to a game near the US-Mexico border. In 1992, the coach, 5 students, and the school secretary filed a federal class action lawsuit against Border Patrol for racial profiling and harassment. In a preliminary injunction, a federal district judge found that the Border Patrol had, quote, stopped, questioned, detained, frisked, arrested, searched, and physically and verbally abused school staff and students for the mere appearance of being from Hispanic descent. As one remediation, Reyes implemented the operation he had begun conceptualizing while leading the McAllen sector of the Border Patrol. He moved his agents away from the streets of El Paso into the physical border, which helped reduce residents' complaints against Border Patrol. In 1994, under Reyes' leadership, the El Paso Sector Border Patrol settled the federal lawsuit by agreeing to stop detaining people for simply appearing to be Hispanic. Before 1994, that had simply been okay to do in El Paso. Despite some initial concerns, such as the State Department's worry that it would impact diplomatic relations with Mexico, and the possibility that it would increase personnel costs, Reyes' Operation Hold the Line received praise. The Clinton administration supported it, the tougher stance on unauthorized immigration, and soon similar operations extended across the urban section of the US-Mexico border, in Arizona, in California, and New Mexico. At the San Diego-Tijuana border, the Clinton administration launched Operation Gatekeeper in 1994, which expanded enforcement on the urban borderline, driving migrants toward rural wilderness areas east of the city. The Border Patrol also instituted checkpoints in the United States, began building border walls and expanding their technological infrastructure, pushing migrants away from the highways, roads, and populated areas far beyond the border. After implementing Operation Hold the Line and having it praised by the highest interest of power in DC, Reyes ran for Congress as a Democrat with a tough on immigration record. In 1996, He was elected as the first Hispanic to represent the Hispanic majority congressional district in El Paso. The Hispanic majority electorate sent him to Congress 8 more times. In 2001, Reyes was selected by his peers to chair the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, where he was backed by Border Patrol enforcement. And something I'd like to mention about Reyes too is that various civil rights groups in the United States, like the League of Latin American Citizens, gave him awards for stopping the harassment of Hispanic people in El Paso and other cities. So he was really well liked in the border. With few detractors in DC or the Border Patrol, the model Reyes innovated in El Paso became the guiding idea behind border enforcement more broadly. Operation Hold the Line and Operation Gatekeeper molded into various prevention through deterrence policies that sought to make it more difficult to cross the United States-Mexico border. Both Republicans and Democrats, policymakers, Hispanics and non-Hispanics, all kinds of Americans believed that if the urban border was solidified and if immigrants could only cross through dangerous remote terrain, like the terrain Javier crossed in the book, they would not attempt to enter the United States. That belief did not hold against the reality of human desperation or the promise of a better life in the United States. Since 2006, the passage of the Secure Fence Act, the Border Patrol has increasingly supplemented their operations with monumental border walls, surveillance towers, radar, high-definition infrared cameras, thermal heat sensors, and drones. Such measures have pushed migrants even deeper into dangerous terrain, while cartels primarily hide drugs going northward to the United States and guns going southward to cause wars in Latin America inside vehicles crossing unofficial border crossings in cities. As a result, between 1994 and 2000, 1,700 migrants died while traversing remote desert terrain, the terrain Javier crossed. Border Patrol data reveals that over 9,000, likely now over 10,000 migrants have died since 1998 within the last few years. These are all surely undercounts that do not include full statistics from local, state governments, or those who will never be found and will just simply remain unfound in the desert terrain. Last year, the same year Solito was published, the Biden administration announced an expansion of its Title 42, the pandemic measure that the Trump administration initially implemented to immediately expel to Mexico asylum seekers from a list of specific countries. While doing so, the Biden administration created a few new avenues for facilitating the arrival of asylum seekers from certain countries. It and the vast majority of American news media and Americans have failed to acknowledge how deadly such border restrictions have been and will continue to be, as people in desperate situations confront policies designed to block them at the border. But recent history teaches us that migrants with few choices will risk their lives trudging southward through the Southwest, just like the person in this book. Not unlike Reyes' grandparents, hunger, destitution, persecution, and violence in their countries of origin, and on the streets of Mexico will drive people to risk their lives to go into the United States and hopefully, in their hopes, reach the American dream. I want to end with something I always tell my students when I teach history, US history at OSU. And these students are 19 and 18, just so you can picture who my students are. As I prepare them to embark on a term of studying our story, our past, I remind them that as famed African-American author and cultural commentator James Baldwin wrote, American history is longer, larger, more various, more beautiful, more terrible than anyone has ever written about it. To me, Baldwin would agree with the nation's conclusion that Solito is a distinctly American story. And there's so much in this book that I cannot touch on in one talk. I just wanted to focus on that one journey, the kind of journey that he had to go through the Southwest and why he had to go through that journey and what the policies are that determine that journey beyond his power, beyond the power of his family or his relatives. Thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions, whether it's over the book or the history I talked about in my talk. I think I saw, yes, your hand, right in the middle.
I've followed some of his interviews and the time that he talks about varies from 2 months to 4 months. Does he really spend an additional 2 months in the Southwest US trying to get through?
No, so he was a very small child, so I think the timeline is hard for him to remember exactly. But he didn't spend that much time in the US Southwest. He mostly spent the first time a few days, the second time he crossed a few more days in the desert where there's northern Mexico, southeast US, which look the same and have the same kind of terrain. He actually spent most of his time going through Guatemala and going through Mexico. Because of course, Guatemala and Mexico also have border checkpoints. They also have immigration services. And like I tell my students when I'm talking about Latin American history, border agents in Mexico and Guatemala are not exactly the most professional agencies in the world. So they're really dangerous for immigrants to be caught by those agencies. So a lot of the time was spent trying to not be caught in Mexico or Guatemala. I think the person next and then over here. Thank you.
I was wondering when Reyes, who you discussed, he had a good reputation, but I mean, I guess I'm not quite clear. So what part of it did he have an effect on, in terms of the racial profiling within the Southwest or?
Yeah, he's a complicated figure. And like I said, he's a politician I voted for at one point when I was living in the US-Mexico border. And I felt conflicted voting for him. But when you're voting, you make the best you can who the candidates are. Like I'm sure we all experience over and over again. His main concern seemed to be from he's a very frank speaking person. He made very clear that he wasn't concerned with Mexican people crossing the US-Mexico border.
It wasn't concerned?
Not necessarily. His main concern was that Central Americans were starting to cross the US-Mexico border, and he didn't want Central Americans crossing the US-Mexico border. And he himself was Mexican American. So there's something to be said about that he wasn't necessarily concerned about Mexicans crossing the border. His main concern was Central Americans. However, when he led the Border Patrol, and this wasn't specifically his policy, this was just the policy of the Border Patrol when they were patrolling the US-Mexico border and El Paso and LA and San Diego and McAllen, etc., that it was okay to stop people who simply looking Hispanic for looking Mexican. That wasn't anything earth-shattering. That was just the reality. Because of various lawsuits, mainly the lawsuit in El Paso that I touched on, the federal government prohibited that from happening. So one of the solutions that Reyes had to, if he couldn't stop people randomly on the streets, that he would have to concentrate all his agents on the US-Mexico border, like he had wanted to stop Central Americans. So he started doing that, and crossings diminished into the United States. And on top of that, there was less complaints against Border Patrol because they weren't stopping people who looked Hispanic, who were US citizens. So it was a win-win for the Border Patrol, and it became policy across the entire border. I hope that was a simple enough explanation.
Thank you.
I think we have a question up here.
I'm just curious. I found the book to be just very riveting and truly a page turner. It was.
Yes, I think I read it in one day.
It was really something. And one of the things that really struck me was, I mean, yes, he was young, he was 9 years old, but he kept coming across really good people. And I think we have so many, I mean, I kept bracing myself.
Yeah.
Horrible things to be happening to him. And yet, I mean, it wasn't all roses, but he had so many, positive things happening to him. And I just wonder, why don't we hear more about this?
Yeah,
well, this part of the book as well as just in general, people have, I'm very, very concerned about a lot of the rhetoric that has been out in the media recently.
yeah. I'm not sure how to answer that, but as an academic, I guess I'll answer it with statistics. Although I'm not a statistician, I'm a historian. When we talk about crime in the United States, some of the people who study crime, like police forces, people at universities study crime. In general, some of the people that commit the least crimes in the United States are immigrants. Because when you're an immigrant, first of all, you don't want to get in trouble, because if you get in trouble doesn't just mean a ticket. Trouble doesn't just mean jail time. Trouble means you can get deported and your whole life that you built in the United States falls apart. So sometimes that is an issue that we don't talk about, how the crime rate is actually lower in immigrant communities in the United States. A lot of times, if you're willing to risk your life to come to the United States, like the people in this book, you do not want to mess that life up. You risk your entire existence. You risk death. And a lot of times those are like the kind of people that we may want in the United States. I'm showing my bias here now, right? But I when I'm teaching my students, I tell my students upfront, I have biases. You can disagree with me, that's fine. But I'm gonna be upfront with them. So what kind of people really want to get to the United States? It's people who really want to make it good in the US for the most part, you know? Yeah. I think that's my personal opinion, but also statistics show us that in a lot of ways. But I really love the human comment you made. It is the core of the book. It's so hopeful amid so much suffering at the same time. Yeah, which is something I think we really need as a society and as individuals. Thank you. I think I saw a hand over here. No hand. Sorry, I'm imagining a hand. Over here.
Will you share your reading list for the class? Are there other books that you would recommend?
I believe I was asked by the library to share a reading list. I'll send this reading list, and I'm assuming it'll be posted in the library posting. Yeah, and I'll include books that I haven't read but I want to read as well, which are many books. Yes, thank you.
So as a historian, obviously immigration is complicated.
Yes.
Complicated. Is there a time in US history looking at immigration policy and immigration practices that you think was like a just way of going about immigration?
Could you repeat the question, please?
There was a time in US history where immigration policy was just, I think that was the core point.
No.
I don't think so.
No.
I think a lot of times, to be frank, not just white Americans, but also Mexican Americans and Hispanics, we think our ancestors did it right. Our ancestors had certain ways of being that current immigrants are. I think a lot of our own ancestors were breaking rules. And for example, Ellis Island, you had to be of certain European descent to cross Ellis Island. A lot of times Southern Europeans, Italians, Irish people, if they were Catholic, didn't necessarily, or Eastern Europeans, they weren't necessarily allowed in. So they would lie that they weren't Southern European. They would say that they were English or that they were French or that they were German. Or of course, when we think about the Chinese exclusion laws that excluded Chinese people, or not just Chinese people, all Asian people, and as well as Middle Eastern people. At the same time, that also makes me think that the United States has always kind of needed immigrants since the beginning of its existence. And when Chinese people were excluded, the border to Mexico was opened. So during the Chinese exclusion laws time, Mexicans were not necessarily completely freely allowed to enter the United States, but it was noted that in California, Texas, labor was needed, and there wasn't enough Anglo-Americans from the East Coast moving to certain states. So it was okay for Mexicans to enter into the United States at that time. And it's also a very interesting time in the United States in the 1800s when Mexicans were allowed to freely enter the United States. you didn't even have to be a citizen to vote. So people, Mexican citizens could vote in the United States completely legally for local politicians, for state politicians. That changed in the 1900s, in the early 1900s, but it's just fascinating how much our immigration policy has transformed over time, and how even when Mexicans were allowed in freely into the United States, almost freely, other people were excluded when they were included. Yeah. I'm sorry if that wasn't what you were looking for, but it's such a complicated issue.
It is.
Yes, thank you.
I'm not sure you'll be able to answer this, but if it's never been just, our policies have never been just, how do we move towards just policies?
I do not have the answer for that, definitely.
I thought-
It's something that my students and I, when we're talking about immigration, they ask that question. I asked them that question. And we grapple with it in discussion. And I'm not sure if we heard a correct answer yet, at least, or the right answer that would work. One answer that I really like, that's the new policy of a lot of Hispanic politicians, especially from Texas and California, is that they realize that the United States immigration system is overwhelmed. There's so many people trying to enter the United States. We literally wouldn't have, no matter how much money we invested in our border agencies, no matter how much money we invested in processing visas and processing citizenship, etc. We could invest billions of dollars, and it would just be too slow a system. So what they've talked about is how in World War II in the United States, we rebuilt Europe through our investments of money into Europe, into even countries that didn't participate in the war, like Iceland. They made them to some of the wealthiest countries in the world through our investment and through our government policies that advise their governments. We did the same with Japan, where we invested in Japan, where we invested in South Korea, and made those countries some of the most prosperous countries in the world. And some of the strongest American allies, not just prosperous countries, right? What if we did that with Latin America? What if we had investment banks and spurred their economy? What if we advised their governments closely to being more democratic and to being more exclusive of their populations? What could we do with those countries and make them into some of the most prosperous countries in the world that are core American allies? I think that would, I'm not sure if that will ever happen or if it would even work. I can't predict the future, but that does make a lot of sense to me as a sensible solution that would probably even be cheaper than the current policies we have. Yeah. Yes.
Don't you think that some of the things that our American companies did in about 100 years ago in South America, there's a long memory, they kind of soured the feelings of the country, many countries against the United States, and now Russia and China are making more inroads and investing in these countries because America doesn't have a very good track record.
I think that's very true. And I think it's something that governments, like the Venezuelan government, has used often, that rhetoric that the United States can't be trusted. We can't erase the past, but we can, as a country, hopefully show those countries that, hey, this may have happened 100 years ago, but we can do better now, and we're different now.
Well, it's policy and there's money, you know.
Yeah, but policy and money can go together sometimes. Thank you for that. And I love those hard questions. I love dealing with those, even if we don't have straight solutions for them. Any other questions? I love talking about history, and I love talking about words and ideas. That's what I get paid to do. Well, thank you for showing up, and thank you for hearing me out. I'm sorry if my voice wasn't as high as it should have been the whole time. But I'm happy to share that list. And if you have any questions, or if you want to sit in my classes, OSU allows people to sit in classes for free if they're not students. Feel free to email me, and I'll be happy for you to sit in my classes and discuss with my students and me. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
I'm going to. It's about Anne Frank, the choir concert.
I'm going I have it.
Yes, my.
You read the. You have a.
And I think we can get it.
Oh, yeah.